So, welcome. It's so exciting to be here again with another guest and being able to talk about the background of music. You can see who I am. I founded Crescendo Music Organization in 2003, and these conversations with performers and scholars are part of our very first online season. And today's topic is the spiritual and a bit also the gospel, its history and performance practice. And our very special guest is baritone performer for Crescendo and many other groups, Jermaine Woodard Jr. Hi, Jermaine. Jermaine, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Yikes. Thought this was Zoom for a
Oh,
second.
that's all right. So,
Hello.
hi, Jermaine. It's so good to have you. So, I just wanted to start with introducing you. You are young, but you have accomplished a lot already, and I think you should fill in. I know you studied voice at the University of Hartford's Hart School,
Yes.
right? And then you have been performing with opera and professional groups. Why don't you tell us yourself quickly so people know who you are?
Yeah. So once I graduated, I kind of set out to make a career as an undergraduate uh, person. Wow, what are words right now? I basically graduated. It was like I just want to work right now. So layman's terms. I'm part of Concora, now Voce Inc. It's a New England chamber ensemble. Voices of Consinity. I section lead at Asylum Hill Congregational Church in Hartford. I cantor at Sacred Heart Parish in Bloomfield, Connecticut. Holy Family Passionist Retreat Center in West Hartford, Connecticut. I do opera. I just did, well, not just, but I did Fiorello and Ufficiale in Barber of Seville in January with Pan Opera. And I just landed my first non-equity contract with Playhouse and Park in West Hartford, Connecticut. We
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's a film basically,
Yeah,
because we can't meet on stage,
yeah.
but we recorded in the frigid weather of Connecticut, which that was a bit intense. Okay, intense is saying it lightly. It was rough, but it was so worth it. I mean, that's kind of the new thing, going out and getting non-equity contracts, regional houses without a manager. And that's pretty much, that was my goal when I first graduated. And to be here 4.5 years later is just like, what? But I'm truly honored to be with Crescendo. Like, what?
Mhm.
And Hartford Chorale, I am a section leader there, but also on the board. And what else? Let me look at my notes. Yeah, I think that's just about it. Oh, and sometimes I sing at the Cathedral of St. Joseph's, which is a really big Catholic church here in Hartford. Well, pretty much in the entire Hartford Archdiocese. So I'm truly honored to be doing all that I'm doing. And I'm taking a stab at a couple of different things. But to sum it up artistically, yeah, part of a lot of choral groups, now professional theater and professional opera, which has been a thing for about a few years now before I graduated. So
So let's dive in because we're going to
let's
talk.
do it.
Perhaps we'll talk also about your upbringing, which was obviously not in Connecticut, but let's keep people curious about this because I think
Right.
our discussion is going to lead us there. And so, to have a little bit of history, Jermaine, you're so multi-talented. You're truly talented and multifaceted as an
Thank
singer and an
you.
artist. And I think that is something so unique and exciting, but it qualifies you to talk about the spiritual because I invited you because I've been completely taken by your singing, and Jermaine has performed spirituals. And let's start talking about it. What I find in these times with the Black Lives Matter movement, that we all have so much to catch up. Of course, everybody knows what a spiritual is or a Negro spiritual. We know some very famous ones we all think we know. But I wanted
Yeah.
us and our audiences, when we go into this holiday season and we enjoy this fabulous music and don't even think about Go Down Moses, right? And
Right.
we just, oh, we think we know it. We think we know the background. We know what it means, but we don't. Or we're not humble enough to think a little bit about it. So I wanted to just throw out here, of course, many people have written about this, and it's no secret. This music originates with the African slaves coming to this country. And
Hmm.
so let's remember for just a minute this context, and I will start out and then I will pass it on to you, because I'm talking about your ancestors here, and it's not a small matter. And that is very humbling. So this starts early in the 17th century when the slaves come, right? And for us to know, not only to understand the music and how rich and diverse it is, it was such a diverse group of people who came, right? From the
Yeah.
west coast of Africa, from so many different places, tribes, languages, cultures, religions, under such dire circumstances and for such a long time, right? It's more than 200 years that this was going on. And so this is really the context that we're talking about. And of course, um, we are both not historians. So there are truly wonderful books. If I may recommend one, there's a book by James Weldon Johnson and Rosamond Johnson on the American Negro Spirituals. It's truly a fabulous book. There are many others. I just happened to name that one. So these different cultures are suddenly people that are in this country and are under forced labor, right? And don't know each other's languages sometimes. Can you imagine?
Mm.
And are trying to communicate with each other, trying to establish connections. And so this song is born out of a circumstance and out of a necessity to have an outlet.
Right.
So that's a big thing, and we just need to remember, um, what do we say? African American spiritual, also Negro spiritual. Actually, the term comes from the Bible, from Ephesians. And
Mm.
I'll quote this. Is fun to hear this quote: speaking to yourself in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. So the African American slaves were introduced to the Christian religion, to say it in a mild way. They were expected, obviously, to take the religion of their owners. And without trying to be light about it, but they more than just passively accepted, they ended up embracing and making the Christian religion their own. And now such in this time, you talk about all of your work at church choirs and so forth, so you're a descendant of all this that
Mhm.
came about. So, Jermaine, tell us a little bit what you know about the spiritual, or what you think when I ask you, let's talk about this. What came to your mind?
I think the whole aspect of spirituality, um, I don't think that should ever be um, neglected from the conversation, and it was an essential thing, concept, idea that kept my ancestors. Simply put, um, most of the time, if not all of the time, they only had their faith to keep them sane. And I know, even doing mild research for this moment, the visceral reaction, the gut reaction I feel, I'm overcome with whenever I read about slavery or what's been done to people of color, but more specifically slaves or those captured and tortured. It just all messes with me. I'm not even going to try and sound intellectual right now. Like, it really just messes me up. And I think one thing that's so prevalent in my life is spirituality, and having those songs that uplift you, that you want to give praise back to the universe or God or Jesus or Lord, and whatever language fits you. That's what I think about when it comes to singing spirituals or worship songs or cantering or um, anything in the church lexicon, the religious lexicon. And it's all relative and it's all relevant. And I just know, for me, spirituals and spirituality is something. Well, I take that back. Spirituality, like I said already, is deeply entrenched into who I am and how I live in my life. And to think of enslavement and lack of freedom in the most basic way, oh yeah, it just messes with me. So I think, fast forward to the gospel genre today, we're basically crying out loud, praising God or glorifying the moment of life and freedom and liberty for our ancestors. We
That
have
is so beautiful, Jermaine. This is very, yeah, that's very significant, because mostly we don't talk about music like that. So
well, I
gospel.
try because I struggle with words sometimes. So I'm like, what do I say in this moment? But spirituality is something I could rant and rave about all day.
You
But
know what? And
it's
this is, yeah. Let me jump in there, because I think for
please.
our audiences, no, you will be stay on, but for our audiences, we talk about the genre and we'll talk a little bit about the characteristics and so forth. But what you just said is probably one of the most essential things of the spirituals, that they were so essential. And part of privilege is that we have music and we don't think about how lucky we are to have music and to be able to perform it. And I think there is something about thinking about singing and singing about faith in such a strong way, like you were expressing it, because I had this question that is comes up even in these times: should we white people even perform spirituals? What,
Mm.
how do you perform them? And you started talking about this, I think, already, in the way you were talking about it, and there you can lead us a little bit. Look, this is the attitude.
This is the essence. This is the core sentiment behind singing spiritual songs. And that is it's a deep emotion of faith. What do I believe? Who am I? How am I in how am I in this moment? How do I make my life better or humanity better? Who do I lean on? Who can I depend on? And I think the core of spirituality or spiritual singing, which go hand in hand, is being able to identify with that authentically and humbly and passionately. And it's so
That's
interesting because I don't get to talk about this as much. So it's all internal and I'm trying to externally relate or translate what I'm trying to say, but
No, you
it's
are
a
very,
deep
very clear. The
feeling.
other day, I want to lead you to this. We were talking about this, about how they're the spiritual. Of course, if you put yourself again in this situation where everything is taken from you, but there's something that cannot be taken from you, which is what you're talking about, your own intention, your own being, your own spirit.
Great.
And the singing gives a voice to that. And that's why I think we feel so attracted to the spirituals, because they have such an emotional intensity. I would say
Yeah.
even the ecstasy that we rarely let ourselves go. We European, white Westerners, right? This letting really you put yourself completely, as you were saying, in the moment.
Yeah, a profundity that you can only feel if you, especially if you've lived the experience, or you're just a lived person, lived and learned person. And I speaking of ecstasy, I mean, I know we were talking about this the other day, when I think about how I grew up with gospel music. Oh, slain in the spirit, catching the Holy Ghost, like that's what all of that is. And if we think about the historical context of gospel music and where it all originated, and you see how it's evolved and how it's been modernized, but it still contains that core element of faith meeting passion, meeting joy. And um I there's just so much that I can say, but
But
I'm
this is,
struggling to
yeah.
find the right words.
No, this is wonderful. And just help us, because we don't often think, I know we were careless often in using even the terms spiritual, Negro spiritual, or gospel.
Yeah.
Where gospel starts more in the 20th century, right? That's one of the main things. The gospel evolved from the spiritual, correct? How would you
Yeah.
put it?
So I do know that once slavery was no longer a thing, um, people's problems still persisted. Black people's problems still persisted. Um, a great deal of them, and they were always so prevalent to us.
Mhm.
And one thing that we always relied on was faith,
Yes.
was religion, was church. And I based on history, Mahalia Jackson, Paul Robeson, and then came Aretha. These people popularized it because there was a point where it was just contained in church,
Right.
from what I've understood.
Right.
And even though they were, basically in simple terms, going wild in church, praising God, which is always a beautiful thing. There was a man, I should have wrote his name down, who basically brought it to the forefront and brought Mahalia Jackson with him. And we know Mahalia as this songstress, this woman for her activism, her advocacy. And once gospel music kind of came to the forefront, it that's where I think it mainly evolved, in a sense where they started mixing rhythm and blues. They think that some rock
Right.
and roll elements landed in there. I mean, it is Christian music,
Yeah.
but we know Christian music to have a lot of different facets.
Right.
But I think it's always safe to say Negro spiritual when you're dealing with a Negro spiritual, like a Joshua Fit the Battle, Elijah Rock, Every Time I Feel the Spirit. Where my notes at? Because
Oh, there are so many, right?
we there are a lot. Oh, Let Us Break Bread Together, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Mary Don't You Weep, Go Down Moses, Balm and Gilead. And the because everything was approached, in my opinion, compositionally in a classicism way, a classical essence. Once people started letting loose, I would say probably in the 50s, when rock and roll, took off, and jazz and ragtime. Well, ragtime was way before those, but
Yeah.
once people started letting their hair down a little bit more, I feel like that's where the turn of music, as far as gospel, found its way to the forefront. And there are pieces, compositions that are titled Negro Spiritual, but that did evolve into what we now know as gospel. Because we do still reference those words. Well, those songs. And actually, one of my favorite groups, the Clark Sisters, which features a quartet, well, now quartet, it was a quintet of sisters. One of their favorite songs that has this very 80s type of intro. It's actually Balm and Gilead, but it has this very 80s. And for a 90s baby, I'm like, I have a thing with 80s rock and roll. It's just something. It like a Joni Mitchell, like we're not talking about her, but like a Joni Mitchell or a Journey. But that song, this black group of sisters, Balm and Gilead, they did it, and it gave you a little bit of rhythm and blues. It gave you a little bit of rock and roll. It gave you the core essence of gospel or spirituality, spiritual. And it infused so many different elements that music was at that time. So I'm throwing around a whole bunch of ideas. In essence, Negro spiritual is a very valid term to use, especially when you're singing one. And gospel music is multifaceted and multicolored. And there was a slew of prominent figures who were no longer afraid to show and display their freedom. Wow, my spirit just moved on that one because that just came out of nowhere.
That is really beautiful too. Because let's backtrack and we'll come back to this whole era. So we have and get a little bit of the feeling how this all came about. Because I would love our audiences to come back and think a little bit about how do these spirituals, what is the essence? What does make them so special? Think about this for a second. You are a slave. You are not entitled to education. You don't know the language of the country. You do not write and read. So these songs in the beginning evolved out of in a way that had to bypass all of this complexity of longer lyrics, especially well, I guess for a long time, because education is really a big factor. At the same time, there is no question that Africans are incredibly talented, and almost like it's innate to the African people is rhythm.
Yeah.
That's why I think we white people, Westerners, European, Northern Hemisphere people, we always feel awkward because for us, rhythm is something so learned and it's secondary to melody and harmony and phrasing and so forth. And so that's a very interesting aspect. Think about the cadence and the rhythm. I'm sure also beautiful melodies start evolving, but I wanted to think about how were these iconic spirituals, like the one we're performing with Crescendo. I'm so excited about diving into this, but there would be the idea of communication between a leader and a group. Swing low, sweet chariot, right? The leader in
Right.
the group, coming for to carry me home. That's all the group repeats. And
Classic call and response.
right, call and response songs. So there is this aspect to them. There is a whole big aspect about the language. We I don't think we have the time, and also I don't have the expertise necessary to talk about the African dialects and how they've come into the language. There is a lot about that that should be just mentioned. So it has to be researched and talked about, and I'm sure
Yeah.
people do, and that's why we also have these great books about. But then there is something that in the one arrangement that we will be performing with crescendo, there is this very rhythmical composed aspect, right? In the swing low sweet chariot, it's
Hmm.
suddenly the mechanical movement that takes you by the hand. It's composed in that arrangement. Tell it, tell it, tell it, tell it, tell it, tell it, right? It has a mechanical, and there's so many songs like that.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite of these old spirituals that you think you'll really love?
Well, to add to your point, they got by on the plantation singing these songs as a collective or internally to themselves to keep sane, to stay above water, literally. And the way the call and response, or the I'm signaling my brethren, my sister, in right now through this song, like, we'll get through it today. We might not be where we are or we want to be. We might not be where we should be, but we'll get through it. And that translates even still today with everyday people. But again, particularly Black people, we're always dealing with something after another. And sometimes you just gotta hum a tune to yourself. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. And it's just that moment of solitude, even with the chaos around, silencing the noise. That's how we modernize that. We there's a whole jargon of new age terms that we use, but back in the day they didn't know that. They just knew to calm the noise by going internal and singing to themselves, practicing their faith even on that field. And I can't say what were favorites back then. I mean, I really don't even know the timeline of certain spirituals, but I know today, a song with, actually, I'm thinking of a praise and worship song right now by Ty Tribbett, who's actually one of my favorite gospel artists. I love you forever. I love you forever. I love you forever, Lord. And it's moments like that that calms the mind. And I know for me, I would say my favorite, since I just did it, and one of my best friends, she's actually obsessing over this recording, but Let Us Break Bread Together it's it means something to me, stretching back as far as my adolescence, because my dad was actually in I don't even know, hopefully we'll get to this, but my dad was in a quartet as a drummer, and there were four singers. I mean, we think of quartet, we think of Bach, Mendelssohn, Puccini, Evie, La Boheme, the Quantum Invo Quartet, like something like that. But in gospel, it's the same. It's the same formula, just forefronting. Gosh, I am struggling with words today. but highlighting harmony and these four soloistic singers coming together to collaborate. But he was a part of one of those, and one of their prominent songs, one of my favorites, was "Let Us Break Bread Together." Let us break bread together on our knees. And I guess for me, that's like I get one of my favorites, but it means so much to me culturally and historically that I can't really just choose one. It's just whatever my spirit's feeling at the time is what'll come up out of me,
And
really.
I think you speak for the genre. What you're expressing now in the 21st century is sounds to me like, oh, I'm grasping the essence of the enthusiasm, but also the really authentic. It really, really, really is what it means to you. And I think this is what we can learn to listen. I mean, I can listen to you all day long, and I think part of what is so precious to us, sometimes we remove ourselves from the music,
Yeah.
right? And abstract are more abstract. I think it's a Western thing as well. And the authenticity that comes out of you and the way of approaching music in that way is just, I think, part of um, what what makes it so appealing and so special.
Well, I lean on my ancestors. Well, actually, I'm leaning on my ancestors right now because I'm a bit nervous having to encapsulate all that is my ancestry. But um, when the stark difference is there, it's just something to be observed but not to be criticized, because I being in Catholic churches cantering, that affects me in a musical, spiritual, um compassionate way when I'm singing a song, when I then do the gospel acclamation. And yeah, there's some rigidity and some
Formality, right? You said the form.
formality,
Yeah.
but the way it needs to be sung doesn't have to be so bland. Like I am a very expressionate singer, performer all the way, and I will show it in my face, in my hands, in my body language, the essence of who I am. And I think that's the ancestors coming out of me, no matter what genre, no matter what piece I'm singing. And we have the Catholic formula, but then at Asylum Hill Congregational Church, where I section lead and belong to, we go from like we literally just did a Berlioz piece, and then turn around and I'll do an Israel Houghton solo or Kirk Franklin or John P. Key or whatever calls for the nature of the sermon at the time.
Right.
And it's all in how it's done. And my human task is to just encourage people to tap into the depths,
Right.
the crevices of who they are, white or black. Because I know black people, we have a specific I know there's a better intellectual word for this, but we have a specific reference that could aid or inspire us at that time of performance. But don't we all? And spirituals, I think spirituals, Negro spirituals, Christian music, gospel music, it's just a gateway to release all of that, display that, and share that with the world.
Yeah. And I think it's beautiful because the Africans, the slaves, embraced, and they obviously were hearing the folk tradition. They embraced and already made a fusion. They took so much of the folk music in especially in the South, right? When you think about Deep River and songs like that I remember we had this discussion. I said, no, it's an Appalachian song. And you said, no, it's a spiritual. And you were right. So it is a fusion already in those times, and thankfully this fusion bridges the atrocity, and basically it rises above the big problem that we're otherwise, what do we do with this? And I think
Right.
music and your ancestors did that with the music, and almost like that, as you say, they couldn't help it, that their spirit was so big and so generous that all of this came to be. So we're so much richer for it. And now I just it's good to know a little bit, um,
Yeah.
as much as we can every time we sing something, so we just don't take it for granted. I was also interested in mentioning for us, because you're talking about classical music versus spiritual, or going back and forth between these worlds. And I don't know, some people are even aware that obviously there was this moment when the spiritual became an art form. It became, so to say, classical and through composed in the 19th century, and became choral composition, and also was referenced in big classical compositions. Not that that makes it any better, but I don't think we think about this many times. We think, oh, it's such a separate thing, when it's not. Antonin Dvorak is a great, great composer, and his Symphony of the New World has swing low in it.
Oh wow, I didn't know
Yes,
that.
in the first movement, it's in the da dee da, the flutes da da dee da, right? So those are exactly the
Wow.
notes, Dvorak. So this started in the 19th century, and I think I wanted to. I'm no expert either, but I've learned too, and keep learning. And we are the one thing that I was saying. I was talking in rehearsal the other day, and I think while some people might flinch when they hear the word systemic racism as a word, you have to always kind of reference it back to yourself and say, okay, what does this mean for me as a conductor and classical musician? Well, in my studies and education, I never learned about Black composers. And in choral classes, I was trained in Chile and then in Germany. We never conducted a spiritual, even though there are fabulous arrangements.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps here in the United States, if you go to choral conducting, I wouldn't say, probably you practice a little more of choral gospel arrangements. So I think that is something that is in our hands to change. This is why we're just very humbly and carefully with Crescendo starting to program choral music, and boldly said, okay, let's invite Jermaine and other singers that you recommended to us as a white old group to start performing arrangements and just learning a little bit about them, and being swept into this passion that you bring to as a performer.
Yeah.
So,
Speaking of composers, Nathaniel Dett, the
oh,
trailblazing he did,
what an interesting composer. Yes.
he made way for a person like Andre Crouch, who Andre Couch,
Couch. Mhm.
yeah, Andre Couch. But yeah, that's all I wanted to add to that because I
Sure.
I wish it was. I mean, it should be infused more in the education systems, the curriculum,
Right.
but that could be said far and wide in just about every area of expertise, and specifically music, specifically choral conducting, choral composition, just singers in general. Like I'm privileged to have learned a lot in high school about Black singers of color, and some of my favorite singers of all time happen to be that. But it's a shame, and I know people are still warming up to the terminology that's been popularized and circulating the nation, the web servers, but it's time. I just like I don't know how much more time we need to abandon that, to dismiss it.
I think it starts right now, and and I think it's both of us just joining hands, and anyway, you've already started it, and
That's a start,
we
absolutely.
are the richer we are the richer for it, throwing you flowers. But Jermaine, you mentioned Nathaniel Dett, and if there's anybody clicking in here who's not familiar with our concerts program, we picked this one composer out of a list of many, and there's not enough time in this program to name them all. But Nathaniel Dett, um, I want to just give this one more piece of background. As I was programming something around the Christmas story, yes, there is some very famous gospel and spirituals about the story of Christmas, but I was almost surprised that I couldn't find that many spirituals and arrangements. And so I read a little bit more and came upon descriptions of what Christmas actually looked like on a plantation most of the time. And I was very, very affected to learn that Christmas was a time where mostly alcohol was dispensed. It was, yes, days that perhaps the only days that slaves were not didn't need to work.
Hmm.
Also, the slave owners feared a rebellion, and suddenly dispensing a lot of alcohol kept people, of course, completely drunk and unable to plot or to even come to their senses. There were also betting games. This is very shameful, but it's also something I never learned at school, or it's not talked about, and it relates to the musical choices. And so yes, there is some fantastic, and I hope in our programs we will be able to feature some. Of course, go down. Um, uh, um, God, no, I'm not coming up with a Christmas Christmas spiritual. Oh God, go to Moses, and so actually what we did, we chose the Chariot Jubilee by this fabulous composer Nathaniel Dett, who's actually born in Canada and in the 1880s, and became a distinguished composer, had a doctorate in music, and had a distinguished career as a classical composer. And he, through composed the spiritual in this big choral work, this big choral motet. And of course, Elijah and the Chariot of Fire, and Rising into the Heavens is also a message of, okay, there's a promise of redemption. So we
Right.
connected with the feeling of Advent, the feeling of looking for the light. And in that sense, we link it to this Christmas story and telling this story.
I
So,
mean, and I think you can help paint this picture for the audience, but I think it's beautiful now thinking about it. Chariot Jubilee, Jubilee Fisk, or Fisk Jubilee singers.
right.
I think you should take the reign with this one.
Well, of course, maybe people are aware of this, but the first group that made the spiritual really known on a concert stage was the group from the university, Fisk University, in the South, and they toured with this from Nashville, Tennessee, and in the late 70s, they toured the States and Europe with a program that was almost exclusively spirituals.
Mm.
And this was really the first time that this repertoire was heard on concert halls. And um, people were unaware, I think, of really this repertoire and its depth and beauty and power and complexity, and it
Yeah,
was
all of
successful.
those.
So the Fisk singers, Jubilee singers, are credited really with this. There are other Hampton singers and other groups as well, but they are really legendary. We should name them today. So and of course there are many individuals. You named some incredible performers, and there's somebody like Paul Robeson and others,
Oh,
right?
King Paul. I mean that's paying homage to the ones that came before us, who paved the way. But some of my favorites today, speaking of groups, but I love the Aeolians of, I'm trying to get their university right. The Aeolians at, I'm going to kill myself later that I forgot this. But quartets, like I said, the Clark sisters, my dad's group growing up, some of my favorites: Mary Mary, Ty Tribbett, Fred Hammond, John P. Key, Jonathan McReynolds, Donald Lawrence, Hezekiah Walker, Vicky Winans. I mean, and speaking of crossover, or our white brothers and sisters, Martha Muniz, I can never get her last name right, Munizi or Munizi. It's one of those.
Yes.
And it's really something to be felt. It's not particular to one group, and I want to make that very clear. Yes, Oakwood University, sweet low, swing low, sweet chariot.
So Jermaine, we're kind of wrapping this up. We've been flowing through the origins a little bit, touching on things, and you are here with us now. You will perform. I think everybody who's heard you speak and also heard you sing just these few notes that you do, kind of there, all your soul is in these few notes already. So you are performing also a first solo for us. Mary had a baby, to be a standalone part of our Christmas story, and I think we will release
Honored.
it this Friday, and this is one of our first collaborations. Um, I'm very excited, and you're a big part of our Christmas programs, and hopefully more to come, and hopefully with many more people.
Yeah. And I'm truly honored because, like, and I recently made a post about this. Anytime that I am privileged enough to open my mouth to sing, to give reverence to God or my ancestors, or those that want to listen, those that care enough to listen, it is a blessing. And gospel music has been a permissible way to allow me to do that, to render my voice, to give praise in whatever way I see fit. And growing up in a Pentecostal church, um, and not knowing how my life would unfold, to think that I would find my way to cantering and section leading as often as I do, a Presbyterian church, a Congregational church, an Episcopalian church, a Catholic church. I wouldn't have thought this Southern boy from Virginia who grew up in the Black church, the Black Pentecostal church, would find his way here. And I'm truly grateful for the evolution, because, like I said, it's everybody's genre. It's not tailored to one specific person. And the power, the manifestation, the spirituality, the beauty, the magnificence that comes with gospel music um, truly transcends time, clearly.
Now you're talking so beautifully, also always including your ancestors and your family. You mentioned some time ago when we were talking about how you would worship together, and I think when you think of somebody of your age and in these times, you don't necessarily as in my circles, we're not familiar with this. Do you want to tell a little bit about that? It's just so
Yeah, I'll make this
special.
brief. My growing up, it was black families, we just stuck together and we went to church and we were in there for hours and hours and hours and hours. But I referenced to this earlier in the conversation, but it was a lot of hooping and hollering, some praise dancing, some shouting, a lot of singing, a lot of interaction with the pastor. And again, that's like, had I not been exposed to that growing up, my life now would be so
So different. Yes.
the I'd be like, what is happening? But I I've learned to adjust to what fits me best, and I love what I'm doing now. But I really value how I grew up because I do love my family and I love the upbringing that came along with that. Um, Traveling with my dad to concert after concert after concert and having a supportive system rally around him in his gospel group, and knowing that my mom was this fierce alto in the choir, it's like that's where I get it from. That's where I get
Right.
my chops from.
Right.
So it's an extension of who I am that I really value and appreciate. And truthfully, that's how a lot of Black kids grow up, especially from the South. Kojic, Pentecostal, the modern evangelical, Baptist, yeah, you, you name
Right.
it.
Right.
So
And when
those
you
are my
connect
roots.
this back to the spiritual, one of the moments, right, where there was an outlet and a moment where Black people could come together, the slaves in this case, was after the Sunday service. And there
Yeah,
are these description about them either dancing and making these shouts where with a lot of dancing and stomping, which is kind of a part of a spiritual, I don't want to kind of put it in that terminology, but this kind of wonderful, wonderful celebration and connection.
yeah,
And when you read about it, you can only imagine the power and the rhythm and the kind of almost ecstasy and yeah, how this kind of keeps growing and growing as in the group. But when I hear you speak, I don't think what you are talking is so far away from that situation. That's what
oh
fascinated me.
yeah, not they are so they're intertwined. That's literally, and it's why I'm grateful for my evolution personally, because where would I be without my ancestors? I think about that often. Like, who in my lineage was fortunate, blessed enough to be alive and then create this legacy? And it would behoove me not to pay tribute when I can. So whenever I actually, if I'm honest, I used to feel a certain type of I don't know if what the right word is, in colloquial terms. I used to feel a certain type of way when it felt like I was the token Black person singing that gospel piece or that spiritual. And now having the liberty to say no, but also align myself with what I truly connect with, it's now a privilege because I understand my history better. And, in essence, there is nothing wrong with tokenism when it's done as celebration, liveliness, as an appreciation for the art, the genre, the moment at whole. And growing up taught me a lot about how things were and still are. And it truly takes a community of people to want to make things better. and to give people their flowers when they're still alive, to show an authentic appreciation for what is and what's been carried on. Because truthfully, a lot of things could have been lost had it not been for oral communication, for the pass downs, for the what did they used to call it back in the day? I can't think of the terminology right now.
Oral tradition sums it up pretty good.
Right.
It's just what you pass on, yeah.
So, and that's what I mean. Like, had these things been lost, a whole sector of my history would be not alive, and
Right.
that would crush me.
Right.
So I'm grateful. To sum it all up, whew, I'm saying a lot.
Mhm.
Sorry. I'm
No,
grateful.
it's beautiful hearing you talk, and we are the richer for having you as a soloist. And it's beyond your voice quality and your training as a musician, and it's all of that what you're talking about, the integrity, the connection to your ancestors, the connection to your history. We are the richer for it, and that's what I wanted to bring to our audiences, rather than a structured historical musicological talk about the spiritual. You gave us exactly what I think we want to hear more, and you opened this conversation. And I'm very, very, very thankful, Jermaine, that I hope we can keep this dialogue in words and in music. We can keep that. But I want to thank you, and I want to invite our audiences to hear Jermaine starting this Friday when we publish Mary Has a Baby on our YouTube channel, or you can obviously fetch it on our worldclassmusic.org website, prominently featured, and the big program on December 19th, the Christmas Story in Three Cultures, including very prominently Black music with Jermaine Woodard Jr. and 6 other Black singers joining, leading really crescendo. Soloist Elliot Page. We're looking forward to that.
Mm,
Thank you so much, Jermaine, for this kind of background that you gave us. It's a very, very precious moment. Thank you.
truly an honor, and I hope I touched a heart out there.
You sure did. Thank you.
Thank you.